Hey y'all, Biohack here. By the time this video goes live, we will be on a event for a guaranteed summon of Valkanen. This is the champion that's sort of like the precursor to Bad Alcazar from the Call of the Arbiter series. And he's got a really interesting kit. So in this video, I want to go over his kit, talk about where I think he might be useful and whether he has any potential in particularly in arena and live arena, since that's kind of the content I've been doing a lot of recently, and give my thoughts about whether or not it's actually worth pulling shards for him and whether I'm going to pull shards for him. So first things first, let's get a baseline by going over his kit. We'll start with his A1. It attacks one enemy and ignores shield buffs, so that's kind of handy. It also increases the duration of all buffs, debuffs on the target by 1 turn. That is a 80% chance once it's fully booked. Has a 100% chance of applying a debuff spread, taking 2 random debuffs from the target and placing them on all enemies under Hex. So this can be kind of interesting for things like Hydra. For a while, I never actually built this team. Maybe if I ever get access to the test server, I'll do it. Wanted to build a team that used a combination of Nishak and Grunch Killjoy. Grunch Killjoy has a passive where when bombs go off, it gives your team turn meter. And so something like Nishak throwing out a ton of bombs being boosted by like Shamail in the lead, and then having just like your turn meter constantly be filled up like almost to max every time one of the Hydra heads takes a turn. Thought that would be kind of interesting to do, and one of the ways to make it stronger is to bring in a debuff spread effect, so you can keep spreading the bombs around and like basically get like a full set of bombs on all the Hydra, so that every time one takes a turn you get a ton of turn meter. I messed around with it at one point, but never really put in the resources to actually make it all work. Anyway, so there's something like this could be really interesting for something like that if you ever want to do that. Overall, in general, though, this is a pretty nice A1 for Hydra. Spreading debuffs is nice, especially if you imagine like, oh, you weak hit on the Head of Wrath, but you can come in and you can spread the block debuffs over onto it and sort of make up for any stuff like that. In PvP, ignoring shields is nice, but I don't actually, you know what, let me pull up the multipliers on this real quick. Let's check the Hellhades website. It is a 3.6 multiplier with a 20% damage boost, so it's an okay A1, but it's not particularly hard hitting. Okay, next one on the list is the A2. Attacks all enemies. This attack deals single target damage to each target individually rather than AoE damage. So this is very nice for Hydra, again, because the Hydra heads have a passive where they reduce AoE damage. So what this is essentially saying is that it's not going to trigger as AoE damage. The other nice thing is Hex has a mechanic where it's spreads 2% of the damage from AoE hits, and it spreads 10% of the damage from single target hits. So I do wonder actually if something like this would be able to like one-shot like spiderlings in I don't know. I wonder if anyone's tested him in Spider. It'd be interesting to see if with the Hex on there, if this would hit hard enough by having it all be single target to actually kill all the spiderlings. It might actually. Could be interesting to try. Anyway, before attacking, has an 80% chance of placing the Hex, so he does put the Hex himself, and will ignore 20% of each enemy's resistance for each dead ally. So that's kind of handy. Damage of the skill increases by 10% for each debuff on the enemy. Overall, this is a pretty cool ability, to be honest. It's like, I don't know, his kit is kind of weird because like stuff like this is really nice for PvE content, like the extra utility from the Hex and all that kind of stuff. It's not unresistible. You can, you know, help with that if you have dead allies, but unless you're like running some sort of like, I don't know, solo strat, which he's not really a solo champion, it doesn't make a ton of sense. So anyway, I don't know how you have to build accuracy basically to make this work for a lot of PvE content. But it is kind of interesting stuff. It's got a 4.2 attack multiplier and then that 10% bonus plus a 20% from books. So I think this could reasonably hit pretty hard in Hydra, especially if you have a lot of debuffs on the enemy. For PvP, this is a big problem for polymorph, right? You put this hex out on everyone before you take your turn. So, you know, it's going to open up his possibility of getting polymorph, and that's really just, polymorph is a big problem for this champion. Like, I kind of talked about this in one of my videos recently, but like, I think polymorph, like, I don't completely hate polymorph. Like, I think it has a place, especially I like the lower level versions of polymorph where it's like you can resist it, so you kind of need to build your champions with like a little bit of accuracy and a little bit of resistance, and so it makes the meta between accuracy and resistance more balanced, since it's so accuracy favored right now. But by having this sort of like hybrid model where you need a little bit of accuracy and a little bit of resistance so that you don't get polymorph when you land your abilities, I think that actually makes for a cool dynamic that brings the debuffers a little more in line and makes them a little more balanced. But for champions like this, where it's like a nuker and he's a damage dealer and you're not really there for the debuffs are just kind of something that goes out as just like part of his kit on accident. That's when polymorph starts to become really annoying, because you're like, I wish I could just turn off these debuffs. Like, I don't even want them, because you're just making the champion worse by having them on the kit. And we'll see in the rest of his kit that that's a big problem as well. Okay, but those two abilities are kind of whatever. Let's start talking about the really interesting stuff when we start getting this wall of text. So his A3, this Death Bargains, it's a 3-turn cooldown ability. It targets an ally. If the ally is alive, kills them, and unlocks the secret skill of Malice Unleashed. So you kill your own ally, places a weaken and a true fear debuff for 1 turn on all enemies. This is what I was talking about with polymorph. It also cannot be resisted or blocked. This is a huge problem for Arena, and so this is why this champion will never be viable in Classic Arena, like for like competitive Classic Arena pushing. It's just way too problematic to be throwing out these debuffs and risking being polymorphed before you can actually do anything on your kit. For champions where it's like you do something and then you do something else that might polymorph you, it's not as big a deal. But for him, it's like if you proc a polymorph on one of these 2 debuffs, it's over. GG. Like, you basically lost at that point. So he's never going to be good in Classic Arena for that reason. For 3v3 Arena, like, it's possible. Like, 3v3 is a lot easier than Classic if you're like trying to be a plat pusher or something. 3v3, you just need to stay into gold 4, so you can find teams where polymorph isn't super common, and you could try and bring him in there. But is that really, like, is it really worth it to like only target teams that don't have polymorph just for this? I don't know. Either way, we'll go through the rest of his kit, but it's worth talking, or it's worth knowing that like kind of polymorph alone just neutralizes this champion and makes him not super viable in Classic or 3v3 Arena. We'll talk about Live Arena later, where polymorph is less of an issue. Okay, so fills this champion's turn meter by 75%. That's an important note too. I think this champion would be way better and way more useful if this wasn't a 75%, if it was just straight up like it gives him an extra turn right after it goes. 75% is really annoying because it means if you have like a go first team and you go your turn meter boosters and then Valkanen goes, well, now he's only at 75% turn meter. And also with the way like the tick calculations work, you know, when he took his turn, all of the enemies got to tick their turn meters up again. And so it's going to be like even harder for him to then catch up and take a turn before they go. So it's very hard to use this ability and go first teams and have it actually use the nuke, which we'll talk about in a second, before the enemy gets to take their turn. So then the second part of the kit is if the ally is dead, heals this champion by 50% of the dead ally's max HP. If all allies are dead, also unlocks a secret skill. So if everyone on the team is dead, you could potentially, you know, get the secret skill that way. That could be kind of interesting. I mean, we haven't, like, people don't talk about this as part of his passive as much. I mean, you think like, I don't know, maybe you could bring in, like, put him in Stone Skin and bring him in with, I don't even know, bring him in against a nuker, like a squishy nuker, and then the squishy nuker kills the rest of your team. Maybe you have like a Wukong in there or something, and then you get the Malice Unleashed, and then just, you know, nuke them down, nuke down their nuker, and then, you know, get your, especially if you have like any kind of like, you know, I guess Wukong would be the only one, like self-revival. But yeah, anyway, it's kind of interesting. Places a shield buff on this champion for 2 turns, and the value of the shield is equal to any surplus heal. This champion already has a shield buff on them. The value of the shield is increased by any surplus heal. Then fills this champion's turn meter by 75%. So, yeah, again, this 75% thing is kind of an issue. I guess maybe this, well, yeah, maybe I guess it would work in a team where everyone was dead. But you'll have to survive and then come back in and hit them again. But I don't know, maybe some sort of stone skin build could work with this second part of his passive where you're waiting for the rest of your team to die and he's the only one on the team. The passive does, like, the shield is kind of nice for keeping him alive, not against nukers, but against the enemy supports. Like if you're using this on some dead ally with high base HP, and he's getting healing and getting all this extra shielding because of that, then as long as you don't die to the nuker afterwards, maybe you could make this work. And speaking of that, in order to avoid dying to the nuker, that's where this Malice Unleashed skill comes in, which is the reason we kill our allies in the first place. So first off, before attacking, steals all buffs from the target. This effect cannot be resisted. So this is a single target strip, which is a little bit better. It's similar to like Quintus, for example. So you can definitely target this against people who don't have polymorph, or even if they do have polymorph, it's slightly less likely to proc if it's only one as opposed to stripping the whole team. So that makes it a little bit better, but this is still a polymorph risk for sure. And then this next part, if the target has attack equal or higher to this champion's, this attack is gained as a bonus damage multiplier. So essentially you can steal all the enemy's attack to benefit you. Equals the target's attack, or equal to the target's attack, not applicable to bosses. If the target's attack is less than this champion's attack, this attack will ignore 50% of the target's defense. So that's pretty nice as well for taking down heavy nukers. And this attack will also ignore basically all the main protections. So block damage, unkillable, shield, ally protection, and then it puts a block revive. So this ability hits really hard. If we look at the multipliers on this, I think it's got a 7.5 multiplier. It's secret skill, so it has no books, but a 7.5 multiplier. And then if you can steal the enemy's attack and get all the attack from them, so that could be absolutely massive. I mean, he's got not crazy high attack, but 1500 attack, so you build him with like decent attack, decent crit damage, and you could imagine stealing the increased attack off a nuker, stealing all of their attack and then hitting him super hard. This ability can smack crazy hard. It's probably got to be one of the hardest hitting abilities in the game in the right conditions, especially if you're stealing the enemy's attack. Or even if you're not, it also ignores 50% of the target's defense, which is huge. That ignored defense is going to be massive, especially, I mean, if you put him in lethal or savage and then you proc Helm Smasher, I think, are those multiplicative or additive? I think they're additive, so I think you'd be ignoring 100% of the target's defense in that case. But even if not, you're going to hit really, really hard with this ability. So think about something like Mortu Macabre, basically, is what you've got here, but you don't have to wait to be hit to proc it. And the fact that it ignores all these other defensive buffs is really, really nice. So, and then I forgot, we've got more to his kit. It's books. We've got another passive here. Places a shield buff on this champion each time an ally or enemy champion dies. The value of the shield buff is equal to 50% of the dead champion's max HP. The shield buff cannot be removed, stolen, or transferred. So again, like, if you're in a world where you nuke down the enemy's nuker and block revive it, this passive is going to help you stay alive really, really well against the rest of the enemy's team, like their supports. So imagine if you have like a Duchess, Pythion, Necrit, and you can basically easily kill the champion that Necrit is protecting because you're ignoring the shield and the ally protection, which is what he's doing to keep them alive. You're not ignoring increased defense or strengthen. Keep that in mind, but to be honest, you're ignoring a lot of the defense anyway. If they have less attack, which if they don't have their increased attack buff, then he will probably have more. And then if so he probably could easily kill. I imagine he won't have any trouble killing champions that are protected by Necrit. So you imagine a team like that. We've got a Necrit, a Duchess, and a Pythion or something on the enemy team. This passive is going to help keep you alive because you're going to keep getting the big fat shield from every time an enemy or an ally dies. And then when your passive comes in here, you can steal or heal yourself by targeting your own allies and getting a big shield from that. So I could see a world, like I said, like a Stone Skin world, where he's just kind of like picking people off one at a time, and getting this big shield and just surviving from the enemy supports. However, he does still have even more polymorph bait on this kit, because whenever an enemy hits this champion while they're under a shield, places a random debuff on the attacking enemy. So it can basically be everything except for Sheep and Smite, and some of the boss exclusive debuffs. The CCs are all placed for 1 turn, whereas the other debuffs are placed by 2 turns. This wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't for this next part, though, where it ignores 20% of the enemy resistance for each dead ally. So you could just build them with no accuracy and not have to worry about that. But when you're ignoring 20% of the enemy's resistance, that makes that really hard, because even with no accuracy on his kit at all, you know, just from the Great Hall and things, you're going to have some, and then you ignore so much of the enemy's resistance. So if they're not building any resistance on their supports, it could be a problem. That being said, this is a little bit less of an issue because, you know, if you keep its accuracy really low, most of the time this stuff isn't going to land, but it's still a potential problem. So, what do I think of this champion? Am I going to pull for him? To be honest, I think I might pull for him. I think he's a really interesting champion. When he first came out, I was really excited about him. Oh, and then his aura. Sorry, he's got one more thing. Aura is 30% speed in arena battles, which is actually really nice. This is a super solid aura for thing if you want to pair him with someone who doesn't bring an aura, like a Sifi, for example. Like if your Sifis are turn meter booster, you know, he can be really nice. That aura can be nice for that. But yeah, moral of the story is I think he's a cool champion. He's got a really interesting kit. I think he could get some play in Hydra. I've seen some people try and use him in Hydra. Some of the videos out there, like most of the videos out there when he first came out from people who tested him, seemed to be pretty underwhelmed. And I kind of agree. I think it's one of those champions where it's really, really hard to use him effectively. I talked about how I think he's not great in Classic and 3v3 Arena because of the polymorph issue, which is very fair. In Live Arena, I'm much more willing to tolerate polymorph because you kind of just have to deal with a lot of RNG in Live Arena, and your goal is more to just like make the decisions that are most likely to get you the win, but you're not expecting to win every fight like in the other modes. So polymorph is less of an issue there, but the problem in Live Arena is he needs like such a very specific setup in order to actually get this to work. In particular, like I said, because of the 75% turn meter boost, it's really hard to get some team synergies that would actually work. So I've been trying to think of like what kind of things we could do. I think he could potentially pair well with with nukers that give a turn meter decrease. So think about Georgid's A2. It decreases the enemy turn meter by 30%. So if you build a team like turn meter booster, Valkanen, or I think I mentioned this one already, Valkanen and then Georgid, you get the 75%, then you push their turn meter back, and then maybe that's enough to get him into the lead. He could also pair up interestingly with Shuzen, where you do like a Shuzen, give the turn meter, or give him a turn, he kills the Shuzen, and then Arbiter takes a turn right afterwards, and she does the revive on the Shuzen, followed by the turn meter boost on her A3 ability. So that would definitely like shoot him back, skyrocket him back up into the lead, and then he could take his turn that way. Something like that could work, I think, and be very strong. But the big issue is you need that specific setup, right? Like if they ban any one of the champions in that setup, it's not going to work, which just makes it really, really difficult in Live Arena, where you don't get the benefit of like knowing exactly what your team is going to be. So to be honest, I will be very surprised if this guy sees a lot of play in the arena. He's been out for a long time. I never see anyone play him. I actually did fight someone who used him once, and I was like, oh wow, that's Valkanen, and I haven't seen him like in Live Arena ever. And I don't think he did much, to be honest. I don't think he performed that well. Although maybe I can't remember. I definitely didn't like see this champion and be like, oh crap, what am I gonna do about that? Like, no, he's just, I don't know, he's just not the best. maybe, you know, I've been talking about go first teams. The other option is like maybe you bring him into go second teams. Like you could imagine a team where it's like Duchess, Necrit, Wukong, with the Necrit protecting Valkanen, like a support Wukong, and the support Wukong is doing buff stripping and polymorph and all that kind of stuff. And you know, Valkanen kills Wukong. Like having Wukong in the game definitely is a big buff for Valkanen, because obviously that's a champion that he pairs with very nicely, since you can just keep killing Wukong over and over again and it doesn't matter because he'll self-revive. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely a buff to him. If he didn't have all the issues with polymorph, I think he would be see more play. But overall, I don't know. I'm really torn about whether I'm going to pull for him. I'm kind of leaning towards yes, just because he's an interesting champion and I want to try him out. But I don't think he's going to get a lot of play. And if you're sort of conservative on your resources, I wouldn't recommend going for him. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Valkanen. Let me know if you guys do decide to go for him and if you get anything cool along the way. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers.